guys, I'm Stephanie with Baby Lock, and today in this video we are going to create this adorable drawstring backpack bag with your serger and or your cover stitch machine. We're going to make several bags to show you different ways that you can finish the pocket. So here I have a decorative thread, but we'll also show you how to use the beading foot to place beads on your pocket, or the double fold bias binder and a chain stitch to bind the top edge, or even place rickrack or piping to make it super fun. Then for our side seams, we can use decorative thread, or we can use the binder to bind those side seams, as well as even create your own straps with the double fold bias binder or the belt loop binder. So let's dig in and take a look at the supplies you'll need to create this bag. First things first, let's take a look at the supplies you'll need for this project. Make sure to check out the project instructions because it's very detailed on measurements and such. So you're going to need fabric for the bag front and back, and then if you add a pocket, which is optional, you'll also need fabric for the front and back. I chose two different colors, but you can use the same. Then, if you're doing a pocket and would like to include some trim, we have a number of trim options listed in the project instructions and that we're going to show throughout the video. So make sure to check out how much you need to cut for that and choose which one you'd like to use. And then you'll want to make sure that you have the appropriate serger foot for the trim that you're doing. Then we also need a piece of elastic, 10 inches if you're doing a child size and 12 inches if you're doing adult or teen. For the pocket. Then we also need strapping. So you can purchase pre-made strapping, or if your machine has cover and chain stitch, you can use a double fold bias binder to create a strapping like this, or you could use a belt loop binder, which we'll also show you in this tutorial. On the side seams and across the top of the pocket, you have an option to use decorative thread, which is really fun with a 3-thread wide. So we have Glamour here. This is Madeira Glamour. We have Madeira Decora 12. We have a Sulky 12, which is a blendable. This is a Lana here. All really fun threads that you can play with. You need 1 or 2 depending on the stitch that you're doing. Then of course we need serger thread. Okay, so this is Madeira Aerofill. And you'll need 3 to 4 depending on the stitch that you're creating. We do have a couple of sewing machine steps, so you're going to need some sewing machine thread as well as a wound bobbin. And then a couple of other things that help, a couple tools, a marking utensil of some sort that you can mark on fabric, as well as a seam gauge to start with. We're going to use that, a skinny loop turner, a pair of scissors, and a double eye needle all help with this project. So let's get started. Let's start with placing the casing in the top of the bag. So I've already decided that I want this to be the top of my bag. So I'm going to take my seam gauge and place it at 2.5 inches, okay? And then I want to mark just 3/8 of an inch in on the top, on the right and the left side, okay? So I'm just going to go 3/8 of an inch in. And I'm going to do that on this other side. And I have both the front and the back lined up together so I can clip them at the same time. So again, I'm just going to come in 3/8 of an inch. And this is an air erasable marker, so it will disappear in the next 24 hours, but it's going to be hidden anyways. But kind of a neat marking pen. So I'm just going to take my little scissors here and I'm going to clip right to the point of that 3/8 inch clip. And again, remember, I'm clipping through the front and the back. And once we clip these, we're going to take them over to the iron. And for all 4 of these flaps, we're going to press them in. And we're going to create about 1/8 of an inch rolled hem. Okay, so we'll just fold that in and press it down. Just a little tip, I do like to bring it in a little bit more up here. Not completely necessary, but I think it hides it once we roll down the casing. Hides it a little bit better. So you can see it's a little bit slanted there. So now we'll do it to the other side. We're going to set that aside and we'll do the back side of the bag as well. All right, now that we have both the front and the back, we have these flaps rolled in. We're going to take it over to the sewing machine. We have 1 or 2 steps at the sewing machine, and then we're going to move over to the serger. So we're going to put a straight stitch right down the center of each of these rolled hems. I have my needle in the center position, and I want a straight stitch. I am using one of the markings on the foot to line up with that folded edge so that we can keep it nice and straight. I'm going to put a back stitch right at the beginning. And then we'll extend a 1/2 inch below our rolled hem just to give that area a little more reinforcement. Okay, we're going to flip it over and do the other 3. All right, now we need to take it over to the serger. So before we press this top edge down, we're going to place a 3-thread overlock wide stitch here, but I have it set at the smallest width, okay? And my stitch length is at 3, and we're just stitching that top edge to give us a firm edge or a stabilized edge to press it down with. It's really nice, you'll see. So I'm not cutting anything off. I'm just going to run that edge right even with my blade. And if it nicks anything off, it's just little tiny frays on my fabric edge. All right, so you want to make sure that you've done that on the front and the back, and then we're going to take it over to the iron. Now that I've serged the top edge, I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to do it for the front and the back. We're going to press this serger edge down, and because we serged that top edge, it gives us a nice stability to keep that pressing of this little seam or this little allowance nice and straight. Okay, so it kind of gives you a guide, and then you have a nice straight, it's about 1/4 inch there. And then we're going to take this whole folded edge down, it's about 1 inch, nice and even with the clips that we made earlier right here, okay? So we're gonna press that down nice and straight with a nice steam iron. Get that ready to top stitch. All right, let's take it over to the sewing machine. So we're going to stitch this casing down with a straight stitch and our needle in the center. We're going to place the needle right next to the edge of that fold there. Again, I follow the guide here. There's a clear plastic piece here, so I can follow that guide to keep my stitch nice and straight. And we're going to do this for the front and the back. All right, so you can complete this step with the sewing machine, or you can use a chain stitch over at your serger. So for this bag, I'm going to use the chain stitch because we can use a really cool decorative thread on the bottom of the chain stitch and it'll show on the top, okay? So I've already done the casing of this bag, and if you'll notice here, it's a little bit thicker. So one thing that's nice when you set up for that chain stitch is you start with a leader fabric that is about as thick or thicker than your casing so that it can step down easily, okay? So I have a Sulky Premium Cotton 12 weight in my chain looper. I have regular serger thread in my C1 needle, and my stitch length is at 3. So I'm going to place my foot down and start on my leader. And then I want to butt that casing right up to the leader so that it'll catch it right when it steps down to it. And the markings on the foot here kind of help indicate where that needle is. So I want to place this edge right next to that, so I'll be stitching along that folded edge, just like we did with the sewing machine. Okay, just take your time, make sure everything's lined up. All right, and we are on our casing fabric. Okay, at the end you should just be able to chain off, but if you have any trouble, try taking that stitch length up to 4. And it's really thick here, so it's stuck underneath my foot, so I'm going to just move that a second. And come straight out. Look how nice that looks. So we're going to clip that leader off, and we're going to stitch the second side. All right, that looks great. So now that the casings are done, we are going to start working on our pocket, and we have a ton of different options for you to use fun serger stitches. So let's take a look at those. So this is a really fun way to embellish your bag, and you can choose whichever pocket option you like. You can stitch Rickrack into your pocket or beading. You can create your own piping. Just add a decorative thread. So this is a sulky thread, this is a Madeira Glamour thread, or you could bind the top edge of the pocket with the double fold bias binder, as well as add some decorative stitching with the cover stitch wide. So pick whichever one you like and I'll show you how to make it. So to place the Rickrack in your pocket, we're going to go right sides together, okay? So I have a different color lining than I do the front side of my pocket. So I'm going to line that Rickrack up. I have cut it even with the edge, maybe even with a little bit extra so that I have some to play with, okay? Then you'll notice that each of these hills here is matching up with the edge of my fabric. And we're placing our pocket together, right sides together. Now I have wonder clips here, which are awesome for serger projects. Instead of pinning, because you don't want to run the risk of cutting into a pin since you have a blade with a serger, the wonder clips are really great to hold that in place, and you have no risk of cutting into a pin and hurting your blade. Okay, so that just kind of holds it in place for us. Now this is also optional, but I have placed this Creative Notion sticker. These are removable. I placed this Creative Notion sticker right here so that I would have extra lines to help line up, because I'm not clipping anything off on this serger seam. I just want to run it right next to that blade, okay? So I have my machine set up for a 3-thread narrow. So I have my stitch selector on B, I have my needle in the O2 position, I have my stitch length set up for 2.5, and the stitch width I want to be at the smallest width at 3. Okay, so now it's just a matter of running these 2 layers with our trim in between through the machine. So I'm going to line that edge up with the edge of the blade and stitch. Continually make sure that your Rickrack is sitting in the right place. And we're going to chain right off there. And we're going to open it up to see what it looks like. That's so cute. Okay, and then we need to take it over to the iron because we're going to press that flat. So I've opened it up. We're going to press the Rickrack in one direction. And then we're going to close it. And press this edge down so that Rickrack stands out nicely. Now this one's ready for the elastic casing. Let's take a look at the beaded pocket. If you wanted to do the beaded trim, you'll want to make sure that you get an 1/8 inch or 3 millimeter bead, and you'll cut the trim about 5 inches wider than your pocket. But before we add the beads, we are going to create a nice finished edge, okay? So I have my pocket here. I have my lining and I have my outer layer, and we're just going to line that up. I have my machine set up for a 3-thread narrow, and I'm just going to give my top edge a seam so it has a nice finished edge up there. I'll line it up with the edge of the blade, and I'm going to turn my stitch width to the widest width, which is 5, and we're just going to run it right through. All right, now we want to take this over to the iron and press that seam out so that it is at the top of our pocket. We're going to press it to one direction. Get that nice and flat, and then press one side to the back side. Okay, let's put some beads on the top of this pocket. So to place the beads on this pocket, you need to be set up with a 3-thread narrow overlock stitch. You can place a decorative thread in the upper looper so that it shows on the top, and I chose a Glamour 12 weight. It's sparkly, so it'll kind of go with my beads and the fabric, the background fabric. You'll also want to make sure that you have the beading foot on, your stitch width is at 3, your stitch length is at 4, and then move that differential feed down to 0.6. That will help so that your fabric doesn't gather up. Now first, I am going to place my beads into the foot. Okay, so I want to take this in here, and then I'm just going to tuck a couple of beads right underneath the foot there. Let me open this up so you can see it. So I placed some beads right underneath the groove of the foot here, and then there's some guides right here and here. Close the machine. I locked my blade down. That's very important. And I'm just going to take the hand wheel towards me. You can actually do this with the blade up, but I prefer it down, especially because I finished the top edge of my pocket and I don't want to nick into it at all. All right, so after I've kind of anchored those first couple of beads down, I'm going to lift the foot up. I am going to keep that top edge of the pocket even with where the blade lays. So I'm going to keep that edge even with this line on my Creative Notion sticker. Okay, so once you have those in place, I'm going to start running the fabric through. The beads won't really move until you get that fabric, until it attaches to that fabric, okay? So then you want to guide the fabric with your left hand, and your right hand you're going to watch those beads. Now just take it kind of slow, making sure that everything's going to line up and doesn't pop out of the guides at all. But this is just a really sweet look. Make sure that you don't pull against those beads so that you gather up the fabric at all. Just kind of let them pull through, and your job is to guide it. Just take your time so you can keep those beads lined up. All right, once I get to the edge of the fabric, I do like to clip close to the needle so that these extra beads don't pass through. So I only have one more bead to go through, and then I'm in the clear. All right, look how pretty that looks, and you can see that gold decorative thread, which will actually also tie into the fabric of my bag for this particular bag. Now this one is ready for its elastic casing. So if you wanted to apply cording to your pocket, this is how we're going to do it. We need to start with the foot. You need the cording foot for your serger so that it has a groove there that you can place that cording in. So I'm going to place that on the machine. And I have my machine set up for a 3-thread wide. So I have that needle in the 01 position. I have my stitch length set at 3. My stitch width, I have it the widest width, which is 7.5. And again, we're set up for that 3-thread wide. Now I just have a strip of fabric here. Mine happens to be bias. For this project, you don't necessarily have to use bias fabric. That's just what I happen to have. And I'm going to line this up right underneath that groove. All right, and I'm working with a little bit more length, actually, of the strap to make sure that I have enough to kind of play with before I place it onto my pocket. So this is very easy. You're simply going to kind of hold those two layers together. It's going to trim the fabric at the same time, and we'll get some nice piping out of this. Okay, so just continually fold that fabric and line it up. All right, so you can see how quickly and nice that cord looks, and now the fun part, we're going to place it within the pocket seam at the top. Now you'll notice I stitched a little mermaid on this one, so if you have an embroidery machine, think how you can include embroidery in this project. And I'm going to clip a little bit of this off. And I'm going to line this up with the front side. And then we're going to add our lining on top of that. Okay, and I'm going to use those wonder clips to keep everything lined up. I have quite a bit of extra length, so I'm going to cut some of that off. And we're just going to run it through the machine again. Again, you're going to leave that piping in the groove of the cording foot. Okay, so we're just going to place that down and run it through. Okay, let's turn it right side out. And look how cute that is. Let's take this over to the ironing board as well. All right, so let's press that cording to the top edge. And this one is ready for its elastic casing. Let's take a look at decorative threads. On this pocket, we're going to add a 3-thread wide with decorative thread, and it's so easy. All you do is set up your machine with a 3-thread wide. You add the decorative thread in your upper and your lower looper, and then you run your pocket edge through. Okay, so I have 2 layers here. And I have a Sulky Blendables 12 weight in my upper and lower looper. And then my stitch length I have at a 1. You might test that a little bit to make sure that you like the spacing of your stitch length. And then my stitch width is all the way at 7.5, okay? So I'm just gonna place the edge of my fabric, the top edge of my pocket, right along that blade, cutting very minimal off, and we'll just run it through. Look how pretty this is, and you can also do it with Madeira Glamour. I've switched out my sulky thread with Madeira Glamour on the upper and lower looper, and the only other thing that I changed was I changed the stitch length up 1 notch, so it's like 1.25. All right, and we're going to give these a little press as well. They look so beautiful. It's one of my favorites. All right, these are ready for the elastic casing. And next we're going to bind the top edge of the pocket with the double fold bias binder. So for this pocket, we're going to use a chain stitch and the 36mm double fold bias binder to bind the top edge of this pocket. This is super fun. I love doing this. So I have a chain stitch, so I have my thread in C1, and I have a Sulky Premium Cotton 12 weight in the chain looper. And then I have my 36mm double fold bias binder on my machine and lined up just outside of that C1 needle position. So then we're gonna take, this is 1 3/8 inch bias strip, and I cut longer than my pocket, but I do want to start the bias just on the bias before I apply the pocket, okay? So we're gonna take this, just gotta finagle this bias strip, and if both of those are folded over when they come out, that's exactly how you want that strip to look, Okay, so I'm just gonna pull this back towards the needle. Okay, and then we wanna make sure that it's flat right in the middle here. Okay, so that it's rolling to the top and it's gonna roll to the bottom. We're only going to stitch just a little bit on this strip to make sure that it's lined up. I have my stitch length at 3. Okay, and I mentioned I had that decorative thread in the lower looper, so you can see that decorative thread really stand out underneath that strap. So I want to make sure that the front of my pocket is face down so that we can see that decorative thread. And I just want to check that I like where that's lined up. If you don't, you can adjust these and move it to the left or the right so that you can get it lined up perfectly. But I think this looks good. So all you have to do from here is place that pocket in that groove there, and then hold this with your right hand and guide with your left hand. All right, so it looks great on the top, but you guys, it looks so good on the back side. While we're in the cover and chain stitch world, why don't we add some decorative stitches? So I have my machine set up for a cover stitch wide, and I have a decorative thread. This is a sulky cotton 12 weight in my chain looper. And I want the decorative thread to show on the top, okay? So I like this as the top of my pocket. So I'm going to turn this over so the decorative thread will show up on the top. All right, now I already test sewed my stitch to make sure that I like it. So I'm just going to run my foot even with that binding that I've placed on it already. I put my stitch length on at 3, and we're ready to go. All right, let's see how it turned out. Super cool. Let's add another one. I'm just going to use the edge of that stitch so I have something to follow to keep it straight. I love how this turned out. So this one actually doesn't need to be taken to the sewing machine because it already has an elastic casing because of our stitching here. So we can either use this line or this line to place elastic in. Now that I've created all of these pockets, let's put some elastic in them. So for our elastic casing, if I have a pocket where I inserted a trim into the seam at the top, I want to stitch 2 lines to create my casing so that it helps the fabric lay down more flat at the top here. So what I have with my Rickrack, I have the edge of my foot even with that top fold of the fabric. And I just have a standard straight stitch. I'm just going to stitch all the way across. And you want to create a 1/2 inch casing. So I'm going to stitch a 1/2 inch away. And I'll do the same thing for my piping pocket. To insert the elastic, make sure that you check your instructions to see what size elastic to cut for the size bag that you are making. So I have a child size pocket here, and I cut my elastic at 10 inches. Okay, so I placed the skinny loop turner within that casing right there. All right, and pulled it all the way through, and then I'm going to hook the elastic on. Okay, you just want to make sure that it doesn't twist when you pull it through the casing. Okay, so leave an inch extended out on the one end. Okay, so we're going to leave that inch there. I'm going to leave this hooked so that I can stitch that into place. And you want to stitch pretty closely to that raw edge because our serger stitch that we're going to use to finish this edge is about 1/4 of an inch. So just stitch that elastic down, extend it an inch out from the side and about an 1/8 inch in. And then we're just going to gently pull our elastic out on the other side, leaving an inch extended. Then I'm going to stitch within that area again on the other side to hold that elastic in place. Okay, and look how cute that looks. All right, let's do the same thing for the Rickrack pocket. For the rest of the pockets, because I didn't insert any trim into them, we can actually use our serger stitch as our first line of stitching. So we just have to stitch, I have the beaded pocket here, we just have to stitch a 1/2 inch away from that stitch line there. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing with the decorative thread pockets as well. Now we'll place the elastic the exact same way. Now for the beaded one, make sure you don't stitch over the beads, only sew over the elastic to keep it in place. All right, so for this one, I'm going to use that top casing for my elastic. We've inserted all of our elastic. Let's take it over to the serger. Now we're going to stitch the lower seam on the bag. And if you didn't do a pocket, it's really simple. We're just going to place pretty sides together. And we're going to serge this lower edge with a 4-thread overlock. I'm not cutting any fabric off, I'm just running it right along the edge of the blade. For any of your bags with pockets, you're going to place the pocket facing up with that lower edge even to the bottom of the bag. And if you're comfortable doing this without wonder clips, by all means, you can just serge it. But if you'd like to place some wonder clips, we're going to sandwich that pocket right in between the bag front and the bag back, and they are right sides together. I'm just going to place a couple of wonder clips to hold that in place. And again, we're just going to stitch it with a 4-thread overlock, just barely skimming, little threads, hardly anything off. So after you've stitched that lower seam on the bag, turn it right side out to where the pocket is lying on the front bag piece, and then press out that lower seam. And while you're here, you can go ahead and trim up that elastic and the trim that you placed on the pocket. Now we're going to do side seams. For your side seams, you have 3 different options. The first one is to do decorative thread just like we did along the top end of this pocket. So I've set my machine up again with a 3 thread wide. My stitch length is just a little bit bigger than 1 notch bigger than 1, and I have decorative thread in my upper and lower looper. I place my stitch width at the widest width, which is 7.5. And if you would like to use wonder clips to hold all of your edges together, you can. But I'm going to pull my pocket to the first side that I'm working with, and I'm just running the edge of this along the blade, kind of evening out any extras that I have to make it nice and pretty and even. Now when you get to the top point here, you want to make sure that you're only stitching on this seam allowance here. And this is an exposed seam. But we just want to make sure that our needle comes off right pretty close to here, to that corner. Okay, so once you get to that point, you might use the hand wheel just to take it slow. And once I've stitched off of that seam there, or that seam allowance, I can lift my foot up and kind of pull this fabric away so I don't end up stitching on my casing at all. And then I just want to leave a tail there, and I'm going to flip it around and do the other side. Now you have some options here. You can just pull your pocket over. If you start at the top, then I would definitely use wonder clips to make sure that your pocket stays exactly where you want it to be and it doesn't move down on you. Or you can flip it over and stitch from the back side. You can see that the stitch looks the same on both the front and the back. So either way, if you flip it over, you're going to be stitching much like you did. You just want to make sure you don't lose that pocket. Make sure it stays exactly flat with that side seam. So if you start at the top, just take that casing all the way back to the needle. I'm going to start off of it. So the needle is just off of that seam allowance, and I've just stitched onto it, okay? Okay, so if you're stitching this way, it might tend to push the pocket a little bit. So once you have that pushed into place, maybe just lift the toe of that foot to make sure that it's going to stay where you want it to. You might need to readjust again. But I think we're good and we're ready to go. This is my favorite. Let's try another one in purple. I love that. It turned out so cute. Let's try it with a sulky blendable. And it's such a fun look. Let's try it out with Lana. I have Madeira Lana in my machine, and the only thing I changed was I moved my stitch length down to 0.75. A little bit finer thread than the previous one, so just made the stitch length a little bit shorter. And if you have any uneven edges, you can just trim it off as you stitch. So as you can see, decorative threads are a super fun way to finish those seams, but let's check out a way to do it with the double fold bias binder. All right, so just as we did before, you want to make sure that you leave enough tail that's tucked just right and stitched right in the place where you want it. And then we're going to slide that fabric right into, this is our side seam, right into that binding. And keep those two layers even. You'll notice this is my bag without a pocket, but you can still do glamorous side seams. Just take your time and readjust as necessary. Okay, now when I get to this point, I'm just going to kind of push that casing up next to it to make sure that the casing grabs that seam allowance, and then we can just complete the binding from there. All right, so just as we did with the pocket, it looks really fancy. You can see the other side has that decorative thread and the chain looper. So let's do the other side. All right, that looks great. So let's try a couple more. When you're working with your pocket, just remember that that elastic tends to pull the pocket inward. So as you get to it on the double fold bias binder attachment, make sure to readjust and realign that elastic edge with the edge of the pocket. Constantly hold pressure of your project towards that attachment so that the fabric is lining up with that groove there. All right, that looks good. Let's go to the other side. I am loving this double fold bias binder. So we have one more to do, but it is the one with the beads in it, okay? So if you run one through the double fold bias binder with the beads, what you'll want to do, or want to make sure that you do, is crush at least 2 beads on the edge so that it can pass through that double fold bias binder easily, okay? So we just kind of crush it, and then we can remove those little plastic bits off of that thread. I'm going to do it on the other side so that it can pass through cleanly. Just make sure you're wearing safety glasses. All right, and that will give us enough of an edge. You can do 2 or 3 beads. That'll give us enough of an edge to go through that double fold bias binder. If you happen to get any bunching in here with the double fold bias binder, just take your Allen wrench and hold it lightly on that fabric to where it smooths that out. You want it to be very smooth here, you want it to roll here, and you want to see that both edges are rolling right here. And once you've got it, you're good to go. I am going to leave a little bit of a tail on this one so that I can tie it after it's done. Looks great. All right, let's do the other side. So these are obviously a really fun way to finish those side seams, but at this point you're probably wondering what to do with those tails. So let's take care of those over at the sewing machine. Whether you've done a decorative stitch on your side seam or the bias trim, it's going to be pretty much the same way at the top of the bag. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that side seam, push it towards the back, and then that thread tail we're going to tuck to the inside of the bag. And then all you do is take it under your machine needle. I have my needle right in the center. And then I'm just going to stitch across this side seam. Okay, I went across it a couple of times because I do want extra reinforcement right here. Okay, so after you stitch it, you can clip that thread off on the inside and do the other side seam. Just remember the other side seam is opposite, so you're going to push it in a different direction when you're pushing it towards the back of the bag. And we're going to do it the same way for our bias bound side seams. Now for these bias bound edges, we're just going to tie this edge to the strap when we create that later, so we can set those aside. But for the decorative threads, you still have a tail at the lower end. And you can take that and just fold that back, and you could stitch over it with the sewing machine. You can also take your skinny loop turner, come up about 1.5 inches or so, run that skinny loop turner into your side seam, your decorative thread, and then create a little loop that's about that same 1.5 inches. You're going to hook onto it. Then once you go back into that serger thread, it flips that hook closed, so it's not going to catch on your serger thread anywhere. And then you just pull it all the way through. And if you get a loop here and kind of get stuck at some point, then just take that skinny loop turner off and figure out which end you can pull through. Okay, so that creates a really nice end down on the edge of the bag, and then you can just clip those threads. And you're going to do that on the other side as well. This is such a fun way to finish those side seams, but if you don't have decorative thread or you just want to keep it kind of basic, I have a basic bag that I can show you how to create the side seams inside the bag, okay? So we want to take just a basic bag. You could have a pocket or not. I don't have a pocket on this one. I already have my lower edge serged, and I just want to create side seams inside the bag. But it's important that you use the sewing machine first. We just need to leave about 1 inch opening down at the bottom to insert the straps into, so that we can serge all the way down with a 4-thread overlock on the inside of the bag. So I have pretty sides together. I'm just working with those side seams again. I have my needle in the center, but I want to make sure that I'm going to line that stitch line up with where I clipped. Okay, so I want that stitch line to continue on to create that side seam. So if I place the edge of my foot on the edge of the fabric, I just have to move that needle over just a little bit to make sure that I have that needle even with where I clipped. Okay, so about 3/8 inch in. So I'm going to create a nice reinforcement stitch up here at the top because that area tends to get some pull on it. So I reinforced a couple of times. Then I'm just going to stitch almost all the way down to the bottom, leaving about 1 inch opening at the lower edge. Again, on the other side, you want to make sure I'm starting at the lower edge, so I want to make sure I leave that 1 inch opening down there at the bottom corner, and then create that side seam on the other side. Okay, so for the basic bag, what you need to do next is insert those straps. And once we insert those straps, we can fold them to the inside of the bag, stitch down the corner, and then we can serge our side seams. So after you've inserted the straps, we're going to make sure that they're either 15 inches or 18 inches, depending on the size that you're sewing. I have a teen bag here, so this is cut 18 inches extended from my casing. I have both of them together. I'm going to make sure that they're not twisted, and I'm going to insert it into the bag and bring it down to the same side as the casing, as they came out of the casing. And we're just going to place those straps through that opening, keeping them nice and even with each other. Okay, and then you might either stick a pin, or I find these Wonder Clips really helpful just to hold those in place. Once you have that held in place on both sides, you're just going to bring it over to the sewing machine using that same 3/8 inch seam allowance. And we're going to stitch those straps in place. Now I like to put an extra reinforcement down here at the corner just because those straps are pulled on quite a bit, right? So, and holding weight. So we're going to stitch all the way down and then go over it a couple of times. So I've already inserted the straps on this side, and I just need to stitch them into place. Now all we need to do for this bag is just take it over to the serger and stitch a 4-thread overlock on both of those seams, and this one is done. So I have my machine set up for a 4-thread overlock, and I'm not really going to clip anything off. I'm just going to stitch right along that edge. For the basic bag, when you get to the strap area, just make sure to push that down pretty well and don't clip into it. Once you get to the end of that seam allowance, you might use your hand wheel just to take it kind of slow. After you've passed over the edge there, you can take it out of the machine and serge off. And for this bag, I like to start at the bottom edge because it's a lot thinner and it serges off of that thicker area really nicely. All right, so this bag is done. All you need to do is tuck those serger tails in or stitch them in place, and this basic bag is done. So you can turn it right side out, and you have your big reveal. Push those corners out, and you can give those straps a little test. Look how cute that is. We're getting so close to finishing this project, so let's talk about straps. You can either purchase straps or you can create your own with the double fold bias binder or the belt loop binder. And whether you're doing either of those binders, you need to sew some bias strips together to create a really long strap. It's very simple to do, but you want to stitch them on the diagonal. So coming over to my machine, I want to make sure that my needle is in the center position. And then my machine actually has a really cool feature called the guide beam, and that will help me stitch these together really quickly. If you don't have a guide beam, all you have to do is draw a diagonal line on your strips, and it's the same concept. So I'm going to place a strip like so. And then I want to place one, and this is going to be right sides together at a 90-degree angle. Then what I want to do is turn it so that I'm going to be stitching from valley to valley. And you want to make sure it's the correct valley, because when you turn that strip back, you want it to be one long continuous strip. Okay, so we're just at a 90-degree angle. I'm going to line up that guide beam from valley to valley and stitch right across it. Then we're just going to clip that seam allowance about 1/4 of an inch, maybe just shy of 1/4 of an inch. Clip those little edges off. And then you want to press those seam allowances open. Now, just for kind of a good rule of thumb, I took, for a child size bag, I took 3 really long bias strips, and for a teen bag, I sewed 4 long bias strips together. And this gave me more than enough to play with my bias binders so that I had enough on either end to get it started and to finish it. So let's take these over to the serger. So I have my really long strip of bias, and for the double fold bias binder, which is what we're going to use first, I have 1 3/8 inches wide is what this bias strip is, okay? And the one thing before you start that's important is to make sure that that diagonal seam that you sewed is going to stitch through on the inside of the attachment, okay? So that it's going to flip inwards, okay? Because you don't want that to flip outwards as it's sewn, so that it's not twisted when it goes through. So I have my machine set up for a chain stitch. I have that needle in the C1 position. My stitch length is at 3. I do have a decorative thread in my chain looper, and I clipped this bias strip to a point, and I'm inserting it into the machine just like I did earlier in this tutorial on the pocket and on the side seams. We want to push that rolled edge. Again, you just want to make sure that both of those edges are rolled under. I'm going to place that foot down and run it through a little bit to make sure that it's lined up. Okay, so you can see that my fabric is flipping out a little bit. So I can see that it's rolling up here and then it's bunching a little bit. So sometimes to help that, if you just place your Allen wrench right in here to kind of smooth that fabric out in that groove, sometimes that'll help. If it doesn't, you can try tucking this in to get that to roll. Okay, let's give it a whirl again. Okay, and once you get that stitch to catch those 2 edges on both sides, so you can see my decorative thread on the underside, all you have to do, it's so easy, all you have to do is just let that whole strip stitch through to create that strap. Now, when you get to your seam, you'll want to make sure that the seam inserts into the attachment properly. So I'm going to take it kind of slow, making sure that it doesn't fold up or anything, because we want the least amount of bulk possible. And then we're going to take it slow as that seam passes under the needle. Once you've passed that seam and it still looks good, you continue on. All right, so after you've completed that strap, you can take a look at it and admire how awesome and professional it looks. Another way to create these straps is to use the belt loop binder. So let's set the machine up for that. If you'd like to try out the belt loop binder to stitch your straps, set up your machine with the 3/4 inch belt loop binder and then a cover stitch wide. So I have thread on my C1 and my C3 needles, as well as a decorative thread in my chain looper. Of course, you can use regular serger thread, but if you take a look at this, this is what the belt loop strap will look like. Okay, so you have the cover stitch wide on top, and then on the bottom, you'll have that serger looper stitch. Okay, so I've placed that decorative thread on there, which looks really cool. This is going to be for the baseball bag, so that'll look really cool with it. This strap does have a little bit of give to it. It's pretty strong, but it does have some give. So one thing that I like to do as I'm stitching is insert twill tape. So let me show you how to create this strap. So again, I've cut the tip of my 1-inch bias long strap, really long strap, with a point. And then again, you just want to make sure that that seam is going to feed down. Okay, so you want it to go through the binder attachment like so. Okay, so I just want to make sure that as I insert this into my attachment that it's not twisted and that seam is going to face down. I'm going to grab that Allen wrench. We call this our multi-purpose tool sometimes because it comes in handy so much. Okay, so I want to place it evenly into the attachment, and this takes a little bit of testing first, but you just want to make sure that it's even on both sides and that it's not puckering up in the center here. So I'm going to try to get that fabric all the way back to my needles so that I can start it easily. So start the strap first just to make sure that you have everything lined up. Sometimes it helps to hold those thread tails if you have them to help get it started. Just make sure that those needle stitches are centered on that strip, and then check out the back side to make sure that the fabric has wrapped to the back side. And I think we're good. It was out here, but it started wrapping right here. Okay, so once you get it caught, run a little bit through, and I'm going to take this 1/4 inch twill tape and place it in the center and underneath. And once it gets into place, it kind of stays in place because it just runs through that guide there. So I'm just going to place that twill tape all the way up to the mouth of that attachment, or as close to it as I can get. Once you feel some tension there that it's not going to go any further, we just want to give it some slack underneath and then hold this flat on the top. Once it grabs it, once it starts moving, you're good to go. So I kind of hold it with one of my hands, and then with the other one, I'll guide this bias strap through. Okay, and what that twill tape does is it gives the strap just some extra stability. Okay, so without further ado, just stitch the entire strap, taking your time when you get to those seams. Again, when you come to those seams, just make sure that you take your time. quick tip with the bias binder, if you ever run into an issue, you've stitched off the strap, you didn't have it quite lined up right, or a flap of the fabric rolled out and it wasn't supposed to, and you need to do it over again, it's actually really easy to take the chain stitch out. So you'll want to work with the end of the strap or the binding where you came off of the machine. So your last stitches, that's very important. And you're just going to clip near the end on the top stitch, okay? So your needle thread, we're going to clip the last 2 stitches, okay? Then if you turn it onto the other side, you might have to pick a couple more stitches out, but otherwise you're good to go. So I'm just gonna take that chain looper thread, and it is as simple as just taking it out. It's like a bag of dog food. You just take that string right out. You can open it back up again. And because this is bias, I would recommend, we can take that top thread out too. And because this is bias, I would recommend just pressing that out really gently. Don't stretch it, just kind of lay it flat again, press it out real nicely, and then try again. When you get to the end, you can just run it all the way through. All right, and then check out that strap. That looks super nice. And guess what? It is time to get these straps into these bags and finish them up. To insert these straps, first you want to take that really long strapping that you have, and then you want to cut it in half, okay? And we're going to tie knots on the end of these, so don't worry about that too much at this point. So I'm going to separate these out and set one aside. And I want to start on the left side of my bag. I'm just trying to stay consistent so I don't get my straps tangled up. And I'm going to take my skinny loop turner and go through the top casing on the right side and hook my fabric or my strap fabric. Okay, so I have that hooked, and I want to make sure that it's not going to twist as I pull it through. We're going to pull that all the way through. You can see how fast that skinny loop turner makes this job. So it's a little bit twisted. You can tell because my decorative thread is on one side and I have the needle thread on another side. So just kind of work that out. You can figure out which way it's twisted. Okay, so we want to leave this tail on the left side, and then the one on the right side, we want to loop through to that back casing. Okay, so I'm going to take that skinny loop turner, insert in the back casing. Make sure the strap doesn't twist. We're going to hook it again and pull it through that back casing. Okay, and then on the left side, you want to make sure that these straps are even with each other. So we're going to make those edges even, and you might need to pull the strap over on the right side so that you can then pull them nice and even with each other. And we have 2 straps on the left. Then we want to move onto the right side. So we're going to take our second strap onto the right side. And notice I have my decorative thread facing out because I want it to show. But you can face it either way. So I'm going to go into the top casing again, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky just because you have that first strap in there already. So hook the strap on the right side and pull that through. It looks like it twisted a little bit. There we go. So this is where you want to make sure to keep this one separate so that you don't get it confused with the 2 that are through there already. So I'm going to pull that through a little bit. And then I want to take this strap back through that lower casing, okay? So again, I'm gonna take that skinny loop turner through that lower casing and pull it all the way through. And again, even those straps out on the right side of the bag. All right, because this bag has decorative thread on the sides, we're going to place grommets into the corners here to tie the straps down. But if you have a bag where you use that double fold bias binder to bind the edges, all you have to do is create a tie at this lower corner. So for a child-sized bag, you want to make sure that you have 15 inches from the edge of the casing smoothed out to the edge of the straps. And for a teen size, you want to have 18 inches from here to the edge of the straps. So we have these cut and measured already. I'm going to place these two straps together, making sure they're nice and even. And then I'm going to create that tie at the corner here, okay? So I'm going to take all three of these straps and tie them together. Okay, so just work with it a little bit so you can get that knot right at the corner. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Once you have those knots in place, you can clip your binding down. And I would recommend placing a little drop of fray check or fray block on these edges just to make sure that those serger threads don't start coming undone. But I love how that turned out, super cute. I have another example over here where I have a knot created at the corners, but I left a little extra. So I stitched a little extra of my strap. I had extra after I stitched it, and I left extra. And what you can do here is leave little tassels. And again, just place a little bit of fray check or fray block on those serger threads so they don't start coming undone. So a cute way to do a little tassel. Then to create the grommets, because we don't have anything to tie our straps onto, we're going to measure in and up a ½ inch. So I'm using an air erasable marker. I can just barely see it, but you could also, because it's pink on pink, but you could also use a different fabric marker that would show up. So this is where we're going to place those grommets. Okay, to place the grommets in the lower corners where you marked, you're going to take an awl and create an opening for that grommet. And make sure to follow the instructions on your grommet package to place these. But we want to make that opening big enough so that we can slip that grommet into it. And then you'll take the top of the grommet and place that from front to back on both corners. And with my grommet package, I had this piece and this piece. I'm going to place this one underneath, and then this flat circle here we're going to place over the grommet. I'm going to flip the bag over, place another one on the other side. Then line the grommet up with the shorter piece and place the longer piece on top. And then you need a sturdy surface, so either a little piece of granite or you can do this on a cement floor. And we're going to hammer this in place. So we're just going to hammer that down, and you'll see that the grommet rolled down to the back side, and we need to do that for the other side as well. All right, so you can see that was really easy to place those grommets. We're gonna flip that bag back to the front side. So I'm going to grab one side with the two straps even together. I wanna make sure that I have the 15 inches at least for a child size, or 18 inches for an adult or a teen, like this bag here. And then we're going to place our skinny loop turner. This tool has come in very handy for this project. And if you can, hook both of your straps together and pull them through from front to back. If you can't, if it just gets too thick, you might need to do one at a time. Pull that through to the back side. Make sure that those are not twisted at all. And we're just gonna tie a knot on the back side. Again, you might clip these tails nice and pretty and then place some fray check on those serger threads so they don't fray. Okay, and we can even those out later. All right, and do the same thing for the other side. Look how cute that turned out. Well, I hope you had so much fun with this project. It's great to see all the different things that you can do with your serger stitches, with different threads, with different attachments and feet. So I hope you've gotten a chance to make a cute bag or a couple of cute bags and use the different techniques and feet in this video and really enhance that knowledge and get to know your serger through this project. For more cute ideas and projects, check out babylock.com.